super excited to be here with all of you. Today, we are super excited to be diving into the Volkswagen scandal, the Dieselgate scandal. What really happened in the famous car manufacturing company that has a great legacy? What went wrong? How could something go on for such a long time without anybody speaking up, and what did the company really do about it to change the culture? So today we are joined by the experts in the case. So that's super engaging. Nina's going to introduce in just a while who we're going to be joined with. Before that, and before I hand over to you, Nina, some practicalities. So today we will have sort of some presentations and a panel discussion, and during that you have the possibility to post questions in the chat, so make sure that you do that and we will address those during the panel discussion. And then afterwards we will break out into table discussions, as we call them. Yesterday we had a great experience with this format where we, after the sort of official presentation, can break out in smaller groups and have interactive discussions, get to know each other, talk about, the questions that has come to our minds during the presentations. So there we have a possibility to do that. So if you have not signed up for a breakout session, make sure to do so. There will be a link in the chat that you can use, and then register for if you want to go into the discussion talking more about corporate culture, or if you want to talk about the complexities around data privacy in internal investigations and how to really deal with all the dilemmas there. So we're going to present those also a bit more in detail. But make sure to register so we can assign you to the right group. But with that, Nina, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I think at least I joined a lot yesterday, the afterwards discussions at the table. We ended up talking about much even broader topic than what was originally planned. How was your discussion, Anna?
It was superb. It was really, really nice, first of all, to see all of you who were there, and just to hear that when it comes to whistleblowing, and especially now the new EU directive that is putting increased requirements on us as companies, how we all struggle with the same things. And we talked about sort of the good ambition with the directive, but then the struggles that we have to apply that in practice. And I think it's good that we as a community engage around these topics to form our view on how we think it should be implemented. And this will be a bit of a rocky road. I think we have compared it to the GDPR, where some years back everybody was confused about how it was going to be applied in practice. And now we are seeing how that's playing out, that for sure that will be the same with the whistleblowing directive as well. But we have to navigate that, and I think what we talked about also was the importance of creating trust in the system and creating that trust for all across the organization that, hey, it is safe to speak up, and to personalize that from the ethics and compliance team, to be there, to be a face, and sort of show the colleagues throughout the organization that things are taken seriously. We elaborated upon this finding that we've had in the survey, that the most common reason in the Nordics for why our employees and colleagues do not speak up is because they don't think anything will happen. And there were discussions around that in our table discussion as well, that that's what our colleagues in other companies also hear from their colleagues, that, hey, I know there is a whistleblowing hotline and so on, but nothing will happen. So we talked about that and the importance to address it. Yeah. So a great discussion, as you can hear. I can go on forever.
Sounds good. Yeah. We ended up talking a lot about leadership training, and I think it was great to hear reflections. And I think that already today there's a lot of good insights to take also for your training programs. And one tip maybe there could be to also add some external views in the meetings and hear what the expert has to say. But yes, so as Anna said, please make sure you have registered to the right room, because then we are able to put you there right after the panel discussions. And so today our topic will be the Dieselgate case, and Mikaela yesterday asked or said that if whistleblowing is always a failure. So it was. Let's see what was the case in the Volkswagen case. I think all of us have some way used the Volkswagen case in our compliance trainings and awareness building. So it is a kind of a probably the most typical or one of the most typical cases where we refer to. And today, I think what we are going to learn is to go into the much deeper details than what can be read from the newspaper. So we have a huge privilege of having 3 guests today as part of our program who will all have a little bit different perspective for the Volkswagen scandal. So first of all, we will have here with us our dear friend Guido Palazzo, who is the professor of business ethics. And Guido will look at the case from his perspective, from the broader perspective, and probably will shed a bit light on, what actually happened in the organizational culture and what are the typical signs that we should be looking at. Then if we actually go inside the Volkswagen case, the next speaker will be Thomas Meyer, who was heading the monitorship coordination at the Volkswagen and was also part of the top management circle. And so he will also share very personal views on actually how did it all look like inside. And then the third guest today will be then Per-Arne Lund, who is the Chief Compliance Officer from the Sweden Volkswagen. So he will look at the case and reflect how did all this look like from a small entity at the local site. So 3 great perspectives for this great, interesting case, and at least I am looking very forward to these discussions. And the flow of today will be so that first we'll hear 20 minutes from Guido's perspective and reflections, and then we'll give the floor to Thomas. And after that one, then we'll have a panel discussion with Thomas, Guido, and Per-Arne. And the best part is that you can all participate into this panel discussion, so please feel free to share your questions and thoughts and anything you wish in the chat. And at least yesterday I really liked it that you also mentioned the country that you came from. So it was once again nice to see that we are not just Finns and Swedes here online, but we are truly a global community. So feel free to also mention that one. But yes, I think are we ready to start?
Yes, we are.
So Guido, the floor is yours.
Thanks for having me and giving me the time to share my thoughts on the Dieselgate scandal, which is a scandal that I have used for quite some years now, because I always thought this is the coolest scandal to teach ever. But I always think this until the next one comes up, because the next one is always even more interesting. And then over time you realize there are patterns through all these scandals. So, but this is probably something we can discuss in the breakout room. Let me just use my 20 minutes now to guide you all through my interpretation of this case, Volkswagen Dieselgate. Yes, maybe in a nutshell, what happened was that in 2006, the US authorities announced that producers of diesel cars would have to follow much stricter limits when it came to diesel emissions, because diesel emissions were perceived as a problem, causing cancer, asthma, smog, and so on. And the authorities decided that from January 2009 on, the limit had to go down from 200 micrograms to 50 micrograms per mile, which is huge. Just to give you a comparison, the Europeans were much more relaxed about diesel emissions. They had a limit of 250, which had to go down to 180. So you needed engines that were much more performant with regards to cleaning the diesel in the USA, and you had 2.5 years to achieve that goal. Now, it seemed that they had achieved that goal because they entered the US market with test results that were compliant with this new regulation. But in 2014, there was an NGO that did something unusual that had never done before. They tested cars on the street instead of the laboratory. So normally these emissions are tested in the lab, and this NGO, the ICCT, together with a university in the USA, tested BMW and Volkswagen cars on the street. And they had no intention to show that Volkswagen or BMW were not compliant with the rules. What they wanted to show was that they were able to comply with US rules. Why would they have much higher emissions in Europe? So that was the goal of this test. But when they tested, they came to some strange results. They found out that Volkswagen, in contrast to BMW, more or less complied with the rules, the new regulation, while Volkswagen's cars were up to 40 times higher on the street than they had explained they were in the lab. And that puzzled the testers. So the regulator invited Volkswagen to explain what was the problem here. And Volkswagen, for a while, said, well, there is no problem. There's always a difference on the street, and you don't understand how to do these things. So you are the problem, you the testers. But then the ICCT did something on the top. They tested the Volkswagen cars in the lab, and in the lab, they tweaked some of the things. So they did some unusual moves that you normally don't do in the lab. For instance, they moved the wheel, and suddenly emissions went down in the lab drastically. So that showed there was something wrong with these cars. And in July, and Volkswagen still denied, said there's nothing wrong, and you are the problem, and you don't understand how to do these things. And in July 2015, the authorities in California threatened Volkswagen to stop the sales. So they said, if you don't explain what's wrong here, you are no longer allowed to sell your cars. So in September, they admitted that they had committed fraud, and they explained to the authorities how they had done it. So that in that month, the authorities had to explain that more than 500,000 cars had been sold in the US that were not compliant with the rules. This scandal so far has created costs of estimated 40 billion euros. So if you compare this with the first big scandal in Europe that happened, the Siemens scandal, it created cost of 1.5 million in fine and another 1.5 million in cleaning up costs. So this is 3 billion compared to the 40 billion that the Volkswagen scandal created. When this scandal erupted, the New York Times came with what I would call the knee-jerk reaction in such cases. They were asking, why did they do it? How can you be so bad? How can you be so greedy, so irresponsible, not caring for human life? So they tried to understand what went wrong in these people's minds, assuming they were criminals, knowing exactly what they were doing, knowing exactly that it was wrong, but still doing it for the profit. I'm not so sure whether this is the best explanation. Something interesting came out when this scandal happened. The president of the supervisory board of Volkswagen, Hans-Dieter Pötsch, said this: we have over the years developed a culture of tolerance for rule breaking. Public statement. What was he referring to? Well, scandals always have a history, and the history of the Volkswagen scandal reaches back in time, I would say for almost 20 years. The elderly people in the room like me, they will remember that there was a Volkswagen scandal in 1993, the so-called Lopez scandal, where Volkswagen hired a procurement specialist from General Motors who came with insider information. So we had boxes of contracts and prices and everything from suppliers of General Motors, which of course is against the law, and he had to leave. Then there was the Hartz scandal in 2005. The scandal where the HR management of Volkswagen had financed prostitutes for union leaders and worker council leaders to align them with the Volkswagen management goals. And of course, again, the scandal erupted. The manager HR, Peter Hartz, had to leave. But behind all that, so the guy who was in charge of Volkswagen in that time was Ferdinand Piëch. And what you see here is me. In 2004, I started as a young professor in Lausanne in my university in 2003. And 1 year later, Volkswagen asked me to help them with a project. And this project was the so-called Volkswagen Auto University. They wanted to create a university that was supposed to become a public university after 5 years. So they wanted to invest €500 million into their own corporate university. And one day it should be one where everyone could study master programs in sustainability and leadership and other topics. And you see here the super ambitious building that they constructed that was supposed to be one part of the Auto University campus. My role was to help them to develop and moderate and teach master programs in sustainable leadership and ethics. And you see me here surrounded by Volkswagen engineers when we started to launch the first master. And of course, in this program on ethics and sustainability, whenever I started to teach on ethics, they started to share stories with me. And these stories give us a bit of a feeling of what Volkswagen was thinking, or what people at Volkswagen were thinking, were feeling, especially. And all these stories were around this guy here. He had just left the position of CEO at Volkswagen, Ferdinand Piëch, and became the supervisory board president. And the story that all these engineers, whenever I met them, different groups told me always the same story, was the following. When we build a new car, we, the engineers, Piëch comes and there is silence in the room. So we stand around that car, we, the engineers, and he comes, he opens the door of the cars, he says nothing, he opens the door, he closes it, he opens the door again, he closes it again. If he does not like the sound the door makes, he fires the whole team. They also told me when he enters the room, it gets 10 degrees colder. Or when he's very silent, that's the most threatening moment. Bob Lutz, who was the CEO of General Motors, he tells the following anecdote about Piëch. He said, well, I asked him once, how do you achieve these precise body fits of your cars? What are body fits? Well, body fits are these moments where the parts of the body of a car get together. And if you are good in engineering, these are perfectly parallel. That's how at least the first Teslas looked like. It's not parallel. It's not well done. So body fits are always perceived as a signal of great engineering mastership. So Bob Lutz obviously was not able to achieve that at General Motors at this time, and he asked Piëch, how do you do this? And this is Piëch's answer. I gave you the recipe. I called all the body engineers, stamping people, manufacturing and executives into my conference room, and I said, I'm tired of all these lousy body fits. We have 6 weeks to achieve world-class body fits. I have all your names. If you do not have good body fits in 6 weeks, I will replace all of you. Thank you for your time today. Ferdinand Piëch was a psychopath. He was leading Volkswagen like a terror regime with total obedience. He didn't allow the use of the word problem, for instance. Now, Piëch was not the CEO when the scandal happened. The CEO was Martin Winterkorn. Winterkorn was a student, a mentoree of Ferdinand Piëch. He had worked with him for many years. And Der Spiegel, which is a German news magazine, published an article about Winterkorn 2 years before the scandal happened in 2013. And this is the sentence that sticks out of this summary. This is North Korea minus the concentration camps. Martin Winterkorn was also having a psychopath leadership style. Not the same kind of cold and silent, threatening style of Piëch. He was loud, shouting, emotional, throwing stuff at people, kicking them out one day if he didn't like what they said, and sometimes hiring them back the next day, humiliating his top managers in front of customers or suppliers. So he was continuing this regime of fear. And he was telling his people as well, we don't have problems at Volkswagen. If you have a problem as a manager, you are a loser, you are out. Now, 1 year after the engineers at Volkswagen started to work on this diesel technology, they realized we cannot achieve that goal until 2009 within the limits of the budget and the time we were given. We cannot achieve compliant diesel filter technology until 2009. So they had 2 options. They could go to this guy here and tell him we have a problem, or they could find a solution. And of course, you can imagine what happens if you go to him and tell him we cannot achieve that. You are out of the company. Someone else will achieve it. That's the first element what was Volkswagen thinking? The first answer for me would be, what was Volkswagen feeling? And the people were feeling fear in this company. Then a second element, what were they thinking? At that time, Volkswagen engineers were telling me very proudly, when I was working with them in 2005, we are the most sustainable car producer in the world, which was true, not only in their own perception, in the perception of investment funds. They were the only car producer that was ranked in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. They had produced this 1-liter car in 2002. No one else was able to achieve that. And how do you measure sustainability in the car industry? Well, it's all about CO2 emissions, because that is the key indicator for whether or not a car producer is sustainable, because of climate change, of course. And Volkswagen always had the lowest CO2 emissions average compared to other car producers, because they had the cleanest diesel engines. And diesel engines are very fuel efficient, so they do use less fuel and therefore produce less CO2. So imagine you are the greenest car producer already, and then authorities impose on you these impossible new standards. What you will think next is, well, this is not fair, what they do with us. It's unfair. We cannot achieve those goals. And look what they do with their own truck producers. They can pollute as they wish. There is no regulation comparable to what we are supposed to do, and that is not fair. If people have this feeling that something is not fair, they feel that they have the right to rebalance things. So that's the next element. And then the final one, this perception that everyone is doing it. When you test a car in the lab, what you do is you don't use a random car. You pick a car that is in the industry called the golden car. So it's a car that is already randomly, by chance, rolling better, having a bit of better fuel efficiency than the other cars produce. So it's random, but you pick that car, you choose that car, you search for it. And then you have the right to deviate 10% in the lab from the emissions on the street. So you can manipulate the car in the lab up to 10%. So what diesel producers do in this situation is they heat up the room, for instance, or they heat up the room where the car is waiting the day before. So because if it's warmer, you produce less emissions, fewer emissions. Or you can influence the way that the car is rolling, the speed. So you do many things that are totally legal, and they're all allowed because you have the right to deviate 10%. And if you add to this that there's a history of cheating in the lab. So if you look back until 1973, that's the year when the US authorities start to create laws for diesel emissions and fuel efficiency, and cars have to be tested and data has to be delivered to the authorities. Since then, 73, year after year after year, you have car producers who cheat. And you find all the big names from all the countries, from Germany, from Korea, from the US, from Italy, everywhere. All of them do it. They are caught, they pay a fine, and the game goes on. So these are all producers who are trying to go to this max of 10%, and some of them go beyond, and some of them use legal methods, some of them don't. But what everyone in the industry knows, we all do it. The regulator knows it. They tolerate this. No one is changing these rules. And the feeling is, well, why would I not do this? You remember the Tour de France scandal? Between 1999 and 2005, Lance Armstrong was winning this year after year after year, 7 times in a row. And when he was caught having used doping to achieve that performance, some years later, he said something interesting. He said, yes, I used EPO, that drug that gave him 10% more performance, but I never cheated. Why not? Well, because everyone is doing it. Jan Ullrich was doing it. Bjarne Riis was doing it. Pantani was doing it. Everyone was doing it. And if everyone is doing it, I feel that what I do is only creating a level playing field. And if it is even tolerated by authorities who know what we are doing, why would I consider that what I do is wrong? So to summarize a bit, what I think is that inside that company, like in any scandal that I've analyzed, people constructed a perspective of reality in which what they did made total sense. And they could not see that from outside, what they were doing was wrong, illegal, immoral. And when they get arrested or when they get caught, they were shocked by what they were doing. And they were wondering, how could we ever do this? And this is not so much about, as the New York Times was thinking, greedy people who break the rules to make more money. This is about basic social psychology that can turn each and every one of us into a rule breaker over time. So that's my take on the scandal, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Guido. I think there was a silence also in the audience, but it was not because of fear, but it was a very powerful presentation. Thank you for sharing that, and I'm sure that the audience has a lot of questions at the moment. You can use the chat to put your questions, and then we'll take them during the panel discussions. So now we've heard the background and some very great reflections from Guido, and let's next then move on to the phase where actually the scandal is on, and there we have a monitor at the stage. So Thomas Myers will share a bit on his experiences as heading the monitorship coordination. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Hello.
Hello.
So, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Guido Palazzo, for your explanations about and your personal thoughts about the case and all the data that you put together. My name is Thomas Myers. I'm right now in Spain at one of our subsidiaries at Volkswagen, which is Seat and Cupra, car subsidiary. Before, and this is the reason why I was invited here, before I was leading the global coordination of the US monitorship at the Volkswagen Group. I'm now 12 years within the Volkswagen Group. I started in 2010 at MAN Trucks in Munich. And actually already there was aside the scandals, aside the aspects that Guido mentioned, there was let me call it a small Siemens. MAN had to pay 150 million euros at the time to the same authorities that where Siemens paid their fine before. At the time, MAN was not part of the Volkswagen Group. It became part of Volkswagen Group, if I remember correctly, in 2013. So what did I do there? I built up a compliance organization based on what I learned externally before, for example, at GE. I was at GE Healthcare, and also what colleagues did at Siemens, because it was quite a small community at the time in Germany of people who were doing compliance. I have to, when I talk about this, I think about the Dieselgate. I think it's important to understand that it's very important for Volkswagen, the Volkswagen Group, to be transparent about what happened in the meanwhile. So we got a really dark picture from Guido about his view of the past of Volkswagen, and I think it's important to talk about it also publicly, not only internally at the group, about what happened and what we did since then. And to give you a little bit, a timeline of what happened. Guido mentioned it. In September 2015, the whole diesel topic became public in the US and in Germany and in many other countries. I still remember where I was that day when it became public in Germany. And I saw a big front page of it was a Sunday newspaper saying Volkswagen might have to pay 13 at the time, 13 billion in fines in the US. So it came to light in September 2015, and the company managed to settle the both the criminal side and the civil side in the US in January 2017. So only about a year and a half afterwards. The settlement included a fine, actually 2 fines, both fines on the civil and criminal side, summed up to 4.3 billion. I have to admit, I don't remember, was it euros or was it US dollar, but a huge amount of money only to the criminal and civil authorities in the US. And I think everybody knows from the newspapers the overall amount that Volkswagen, that this cost Volkswagen was around 30 billion euros, 30 billion euros. And most of that other amount, which was not the fine in the US, were amounts paid to customers to compensate past customers, especially to buy back cars in the US, but also to compensate customers in all kind of countries, for example, in mass claims in Germany and in many other countries. Some of these proceedings I've not dealt when I was at Volkswagen. I've not dealt with the court proceedings, only with the US monitorship. So, but I still think there are a few of them are still running somewhere in the world. When it comes to when it comes to the people, Guido mentioned Mr. Piech, who was at the supervisory board, heading the supervisory board of Volkswagen AG and Volkswagen Group, and Mr. Winterkorn, the CEO, who stayed CEO about 1 week or maybe 10 days after the whole thing became public in September 2015, and then he resigned or was asked to resign. I've never met both of them, so I've heard stories about one or the other. I've never met them, so I've never experienced myself a situation where I can compare it to what Guido mentions. The settlements that Volkswagen entered into beginning of 2015, they included a US monitorship. For those of you who are not familiar with US monitorships, this means that a person with a team, normally a US person, could also be, there are also examples of a monitor of the Department of Justice in the US who came from the UK or came from Switzerland or came from, maybe in exceptional cases, from Germany, is imposed on a company for a certain number of years, very often 2 years or maybe even 3 years, in order to, let's call it, audit the company, look at the processes, etc. I will explain that a little bit more. And in Volkswagen's case, on the civil side, it's called third partial consent decree. Both settlements are public, so you can read all the details in the settlements. They are public on the websites of the Department of Justice in the US. On the civil side, it was mostly around Volkswagen AG in Germany, Audi AG in Germany, with a more powered, with a bigger engine, so to say, and Volkswagen Group of America in Herndon near Washington, plus the production site, the only production site in the US, which is in Chattanooga. On the criminal side, the plea agreement didn't really have on its scope, and that one is called plea agreement. In its scope, it had, I think, only Porsche excluded and Porsche of North America, because they had a separate agreement with the US Department of Justice. So it applied, so to say, to the entire Volkswagen Group with all kind of brands. We have more than 12 brands, and then we have the regions, North, South America, and we have China as a region. A while ago, I held a speech which I called a monitorship, it's a mirror and benchmark for the company and the management. And why did I call my speech this way? It's very simple. You have somebody coming in with quite a team coming in from the outside, an independent person, I will talk about that, independent both from the company. The company has to pay the person and the team. So we had to pay the invoices, but also independent from the US Department of Justice. So really a person in the middle. And when such a person and the team comes to a company, in this case to Volkswagen Group, it holds up a mirror in front of your face and shows you your own face and your own behavior. And this is what happened during the 3 years with a monitor. Actually, a monitorship can be extended. It can be extended by, I don't know, a year, 2 years. In Volkswagen's case, on the civil side, it was exactly the original 3 years. On the criminal side, we had an extension which was rather small, an extension we asked for 3 months to finalize or to let the monitor be able to finalize his testing of the respective processes and measures that the group took. Who was our monitor? Maybe just quickly with regard to the monitorship. Who was our monitor? It was Larry Dean Thompson. Larry Dean Thompson is an extremely well-known lawyer, probably one of the most prominent lawyers in the US. In the past, he led the Enron investigation, where everybody knows that was a very important investigation. He was Chief Compliance Officer of PepsiCo, and he was the Deputy Attorney General of the DOJ, so the second person in the Department of Justice in the US. And there were probably also speculations in the past if he might lead the Department of Justice in the US. When he joined, so to say, joined Volkswagen as the auditor and monitor under those two settlements. It was one person, one team who did those two activities, those two mandates. He said, and I quote, "In 3 years' time, Volkswagen should be a company that is distinguished both by its high performance, meaning high performance of the products, and its high integrity." So he was talking about integrity. What is a monitor? Let me just briefly also quote from the US Department's documents on the monitor's role and responsibility. A monitor is an independent third party, not an employee or an agent of the corporation or of the government, of the US government. A monitor's primary responsibility is to assess and monitor a corporation's compliance with the terms of the agreement, which is those two settlement agreements in our case from January 2017, of the agreement specifically designed to address and reduce the risk of reoccurrence of the corporation's misconduct and not to further punitive goals. And the last half sentence, not to further punitive goals, shows us that the work of a monitor is very much looking into the future and not so much in the past. So a US monitor audits the processes, the behavior, the HR processes, in our case, product compliance, environmental compliance in Volkswagen Group, but he's not redoing or reviewing the investigation. Nevertheless, in order to do the work properly, a monitor normally looks over his shoulder and looks back and says, okay, but what were the root causes? What did the company find out? What did the authorities say about the root causes? And there we are at the aspects that Guido summarized in his personal considerations. Also, the monitor is not dealing with the criminal proceedings against individuals or against the company in certain countries, but he needs to understand how the company deals with these challenges. So if public prosecutors, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Germany, in other countries, say you need to get rid of certain people and maybe the company throws them out, and then maybe people might go to the employment court and say, yeah, but I didn't do anything wrong, you need to rehire me or give me my contract back or keep me. So how the company dealt with that is in general important for a monitor, and you are dealing very transparently with a monitor because you cannot lie to a monitor. If you lie to a monitor, you endanger the settlement agreements, which means that you might run the risk of paying a much higher fine. So when choosing a monitor, I think that there are quite a large number of documents, but mainly if a monitor is necessary in a big scandal in the US. We know a lot about FCPA, Foreign Corruption Practices Act, where we have seen monitorships in Europe and are still seeing monitorships in Europe and will see monitorships in Europe, but also on other topics like anti-money laundering, regarding some banks, sanctions that were not treated properly from the US perspective. And a company can always try to negotiate whether you have a monitor or you don't. My understanding from Volkswagen is, because I was not part of the settlement discussions and negotiations, is that there was not a lot of room to negotiate that we won't have a monitor. And then it's all kind of questions. What did the company already did between the time when the scandal came up, or when it went public, when the public investigation started, up until the settlement of the whole thing, in this case, January 2017, or when the monitor actually came on board. And so in our case, it was written down in the settlements, we will have a monitor, and the monitor then officially started after the settlements were signed in January 2017. He officially started with his team in Wolfsburg, in Ingolstadt, and in the US, and then later in other countries and at other brands. He started his work in June 2017. Let me give you one more bridge to what Guido said. So in the plea agreement, which is the settlement on the criminal side between Volkswagen and the US Department of Justice, there is an Exhibit 3, which is public, so you can also read that. And there it talks about the monitor's mandate at Volkswagen. And let me just quote those two sentences. During the term of the monitorship, the monitor will evaluate the company's implementation and enforcement of its compliance and ethics program, the mandate. So it's all about implementation of activities, processes, maybe IT tools to back up controls. It's not just about compliance, it's about risk, it's about the entire HR process, from hiring a person to getting rid of a person to doing investigations, throwing out people, sending warning letters, whatever it would be. And then it says, this mandate shall include an assessment of the board of management's and senior management's commitment to and effective implementation of the company's corporate compliance and ethics program. So the mandate includes an assessment of the board of management's and senior management's commitment to the whole program that you make better or that you are newly setting up. So that's, so to say, the people side of the whole thing. And what about the commitment? There are various documents on how to choose monitors, but there are also various documents in the US about compliance programs. And one is a DOJ paper, a paper of the Department of Justice from June 2020, quite recent, which is called Evaluation of Corporate Compliance Programs. And that paper asks many, many, many questions, how you can evaluate your own compliance program, or how people who are looking at your program can use these questions to evaluate how robust, how good your program is. And the two main headings of the paper are, is the corporation's compliance program well designed, number one, I jump to number 2. Is the corporation's compliance program adequately resourced and empowered to function effectively? And the third one, does the corporation's compliance program work in practice? So is the design good? Is the implementation good? And have you actually tested it yourself by third parties? Or in this case, the monitor tests it in the second half of its time. And in this middle one, is it adequately resourced, empowered to function effectively? It also mentions commitment by senior and middle management. And if we look deeper into commitment by senior and middle management, it talks about, and it includes a lot of questions around conduct at the top, or what we always call tone from the top, but it's not just tone from the top, it's actually conduct from the top. So what did people in the executive management board, how did they treat with it? In Germany, we have the 2 layers. We have the executive management, and then we have the supervisory board, which advises and supervises, that has an oversight. So how do they deal with the topics? Are they supporting it? Do they do commitments? And what kind of commitments do they have? And do they do the right oversight? Do they ask the respective, do they allow enough budget people for the organization? Are they getting enough reports? Are they doing the right oversight from the view of the supervisory board? Things like that. And then you have very detailed measures that are mentioned that you can take. So what's the impact at the end of the day of the monitor on a compliance management system, and how do I see the impact on Volkswagen? 3 years, let me start. 3 years is a really long time. It sounds short, but if you have a more or less continuously an external team with you, which was comprised, in the case of Volkswagen at the beginning, it was said maybe it will be 40 people, the monitor team, the monitor said. Later he said, I probably need 60, but actually he had more people working on that. And you deal with that. They are not all based in Germany. Some will be based, or where the company is, in this case in Germany, and then also in the US, but a lot of remote workers as well before COVID, a lot of flying in, flying out, meeting in person, meetings via telephone, via video conferences, etc., what we now know as normal. The one thing that I have to say is, the very interesting thing is, it's really a monitorship is a fast track. You accelerate the entire compliance and integrity activities. Let's say what you normally probably would be getting done in 5 to 8 years, you get done in 3 years, because you need to. You have a lot of pressure. The monitor writes reports after, let's say, after each year, after each 9 months. So in our case, it was 3 criminal reports on the criminal side, 3 on the civil side. The civil ones are public. The criminal ones are secret. And at the end, the monitor also had to do, on the criminal side, he had to issue a certificate. I will get to that in a minute. And certificate stating that the compliance and environmental program of Volkswagen is robust. And he actually gave that certificate at the very end. And I will get to that again in a minute. So there is a lot of visible and sustainable change. We changed dozens, if not hundreds of processes. We spend a lot of money. We have much bigger organizations right now, not just on the second line, what we earlier called second line of defense, not just in compliance, risk, legal, but we also introduced a very strong and fitted with budget and people product compliance organization globally, and environmental compliance organization globally. We are still doing follow-ups on the respective measures. We are continuing to doing the follow-up under a program, under an umbrella program, which is called Together for Integrity, which runs since a few years and will probably go until 2025 because the company is so big. We did a lot of communication. We had a lot of discussions internally we have huge communications. We also have, let's call it, smaller activities. And let me just give you one example. When I was coordinating this whole monitorship, I was reporting to Hiltrud Werner, the first woman on the board of Volkswagen. Also an aspect that for me is very important, because when I joined Volkswagen, there was only, most of the brands only had German male people leading the different boards. And Hiltrud was, there was a predecessor, also a woman for 1 year, who was there only, for whatever reason, she was only there for 1 year in the group board, new group board position for legal and integrity. And then Hiltrud took over. I worked for her for 4 years. And she was then the second woman, but the only woman in the group board. So not a very diverse team, and we might be talking later about that in our discussion. And she, about once a month, every 6 weeks, at the big Volkswagen site in Wolfsburg, at the headquarters, you know, it's a big production site. There are buses running back and forth on the production site, and every 4 to 6 weeks, she invited people from whatever kind of department to join her in the bus. She entered the bus, 20 people entered the bus, it all before COVID, I have to say. And the people could ask her whatever they wanted. They could tell her, you know, this is not working, this is working, here I'm not happy, here I'm happy. Very transparent activity from her. Just a very small piece of the whole program. I mean, there were very big pieces, what we introduced, new processes, IT tools, whistleblowing, etc., etc., etc. But you see, we really try to include a lot of transparency. What also changed was the US monitor has a very centralized corporate governance approach. So if in the old times, maybe somebody in the headquarters says, hey, I'm dealing with the country where we are in the headquarter, in this case, Germany, or maybe if you are a company in the UK, I deal with UK. I don't deal with Brazil or China or Russia or North and South America. This changes when you have a US monitor, because he says, okay, you need to have an oversight of everything that's going on, that people don't just throw out a compliance officer in Brazil or South Africa or wherever, just because the CEO doesn't like the compliance officer to say, no, don't do that. Same applies to the risk management function and other functions. So this helped us to streamline and to get a better grip and more people in the organization globally. It's more centralized. And I will stop here, just looking at the watch. And then I would like to read to you what, in a public statement, what the monitor said at the end when he certified. And it's a public statement that he made and that we were able to use as well. At the end of the monitorship in September 2020, Larry Thompson said, Volkswagen is a better organization today than it was 3 years ago. Briefly pausing here, what did he mean? I mean, he looked at how were things when the scandal popped up, so in the past. What did the company do in the meanwhile? He made a lot of recommendations in his reports. We had to implement them. He tested them. And then we also had a plan, what about the future? Maybe some of the activities were not entirely rolled out, or maybe there were some things that he was able to test 90%, but 10% were missing, such examples. So, and he says from what he sees, it's a better organization today than it was 3 years ago. And then he says, it will require continued vigilance, but the structure and process in place and the commitments at all levels of the company, along with the oversight of the supervisory board, can make Volkswagen a long-term and sustainable ethics, integrity, and compliance success. He did not say has made Volkswagen a long-term and sustainable ethics, integrity, and compliance success, or it will be. He says can make Volkswagen a long-term and sustainable ethics, integrity, and compliance success. For myself, I was wondering, why did he use exactly this language? And I want to quote two things what Larry said when he was doing the monitorship. He said one thing is, I've never seen a city of around 50 or 100,000 people without a police station. And if you look at a big company, which is maybe 50,000, 100,000 people, or even more, like Volkswagen, you know, if you compare that to a city, I've never seen a big city without a police station. So in other words, there are always crooks, or there could always be crooks, and you're not checking everybody when you hire people. You might be checking, doing certain, with the consent of the people, certain background checks when you hire management, board members, etc. But you're not checking everybody. Nobody does that. The other thing he says is a company is a mirror of society, which means the same. So also in society, you have people which are doing good, and you actually have people who are doing bad. My personal view is that you will not have no police station. And I think most of you will agree to that, because otherwise we wouldn't need to have an investigation, internal investigation, whistleblowing, etc. There's always something happening. The bigger the company is, the more people who don't do good are in the company. But you need to try everything in order to reduce the risk of having those people, especially when it comes to people who are taking decisions, when it comes to management, senior management, board members, etc. And this is a summary from my view on the US monitorship, and I would like to give it back to the moderators, and then I think we will go into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. This was very insightful. I'm sure many of the people from the audience really felt this is great to hear the reflections from the monitorship, because many of us have not really experienced it. But yes, so I think now it's time to start the panel discussion. And first, I would like to invite Per-Arne to join the discussion with us. Hi, Per-Arne, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. I'm here. Yes, I'm.
Great to have all of you here. So I think we could start, maybe Per-Arne, from you. Any reflections from the presentation you just heard?
Yes, of course. I recognize most of what both Guido and Thomas is telling us, and I haven't, but I might have some other experience from the other side, working as head of the GRC department in a pretty small subsidiary owned by Volkswagen in Wolfsburg, Volkswagen AG in Wolfsburg. We are roughly around 400 people working in Sweden. Then we have 300 white collar and 100 blue collar in the warehouse. So it's a fairly small subsidiary. I've been in the company since actually 1991, so it's a very, very long time. So actually, Mr. PH was heading our board for many years, and then you ask, of course, why is such a guy heading a small subsidiary board in Sweden? And the reason was that he was very interested in Scania at that time, and we were partly owned by Scania and Volkswagen for many years. Actually, our company started as a branch at Scania many years ago, 70 years ago in Sweden. So there was an interest from Volkswagen to Scania, and now you probably all know that Volkswagen is owning Scania. So I have not met all these men and women that are mentioned, but I heard the stories also. But since 2019, I took over the GRC department, and my first task was to go to Wolfsburg in June 2019 and kick off the Together for Integrity program, as Thomas mentioned, in Sweden. And we are still working on it, although we are getting towards the end of it. We have closed some of the key initiatives that is included there, but we still have some open topics to do. But let me give you a short reflection of how what I remember of 2015 and first time we heard about this in Sweden. It was all came as a shock, of course, to us. And working in the company, suddenly we were also suspected for being criminals, more or less, because our MD was called for police integrations and a couple of other people from the company. So we were suddenly also accused for wrongdoing or breaking the law. And that was shocking, of course. Everything was closed down, and so there were no further investigations, and so that was all clear. But that was a shock that spread into our company. And I think, exactly like me, I think a lot of people in the company who had been there for a long time suddenly had a feeling of, I'm working in a company that is not compliant and breaking the rules. Do I really want to stay in this company, or should I leave? I had those thoughts, I remember, in 2015 in September when this happened. At that time, I was responsible for after sales business for Volkswagen commercial vehicles in Sweden. I met a lot of customers, and I had to stand up and face the customers and say, sorry, but we're gonna fix your cars. And in Sweden, we had around 220,000 cars that were affected with this fake software that we have to update. So that was a big job we had to do, and we have to call the cars into the workshop and update them. And we had to explain for the customers, and that was not very nice. So I think a lot of people had the same feeling like me. Is this really the company I want to represent in the future? But after a couple of months, I think it changed, and we wanted to do really to make things come back in order again, and still continuing doing the good job that everybody thought we were doing in Sweden. You know, we always try to be hard to be compliant and do our best and be a nice business partner to our customers and in Sweden. So that was tough, this news to get from the beginning, and I think that is the starting point in this whole case, and with the Together for Integrity program that later on was rolled out. So it was a tough start for us as a small importer in Sweden to get into this big program. And also I would like to add that we had a very, very strong culture in our company from the beginning. We had strong values in the company. For example, we had integrity as one of our values in the companies in many years before it came up via the Together for Integrity program. And that is also a challenge. How can you integrate this big program rolling out from your mother company into a small company where you were pretty far on the road to create a good culture and work with ethics and compliance, etc., and integrity. So it was challenging in the beginning, for sure. So that was a short summary of the feelings when this kicked off, I would say.
Thank you, Per-Arne, for the very personal reflections. I think that now that we've kind of heard all of these three stories or perspectives, and of course the purpose of Nordic Business Ethics is also always to get inspired and learn from each other and from others. So in concrete terms, I would like to ask from all of you, what do you think is the biggest learning from this case. Guido, would you like to start?
Yeah, maybe the biggest learning that I see is a learning that you can take from any scandal. You can take Boeing, Theranos, Uber, Wells Fargo, Siemens, whatever you want. The biggest learning is that these scandals do not happen because there are a few crooks. They happen because companies might get into a spiral down towards unethical behavior by creating toxic cultures, by creating so much pressure, unrealistic expectations, bad leadership, that over time, slowly, people inside the organization change the way they perceive the world. And they change it in a way that they do the wrong thing and they believe what they do is appropriate. And that is the big danger. So for me, Volkswagen is a pretty normal scandal, normal case. And a lot of companies have similar tendencies without it coming to such an extreme rule breaking, but the potential is always there if you create toxic cultures.
Thanks, Guido. Thomas, your learning.
So when I joined Volkswagen, as I said before, I saw a board which was comprised of people and a supervisory board where soon later the faces changed. So especially the two people that Guido mentioned, at a certain point in time, they were no longer there. I never met Winterkorn. And that was the same what I experienced when I started in 2010 at MAN at the scandal. You know, people were exchanged, maybe for reasons of the scandal, maybe one used the scandal to replace people. And I think it's very much, when we talk about culture, it's very much what do the role models at the top live or don't live? You know, do they put the pressure? And there will always be pressure. I mean, Per Arne can sing a song about that, how we say in German, about, you know, the pressure on the sales side, for example, you know, to deliver the sales KPIs, or the pressure on the purchasing side to buy the goods for a good price with the right quality, or maybe for the cheapest price. And I am a big believer that if you have the right people at the top with the right diversity, that not only the people, so to say, the normal me and you, the normal workers, the normal managers can speak up and say, this is going wrong, but that there is also a discussion in the boards, in the supervisory boards, an open discussion, and people don't fear on that level. And the more, in my view, the more diverse people, also during the time in Wolfsburg, but also afterwards, I was thinking a lot about that, and I was following what's going on in other companies. The more diversity, the more open discussion you have there, and that triggers down to the rest of the organization below. If there is a good culture at the top, you know, and people talk about all these challenges, because there are a lot of challenges, especially today in this perfect storm of a lot of things going wrong at the moment in the world, in the supply chains and with Russia and whatever. If there is a good, open, transparent discussion, if there's a lot of communication, this helps the company, the culture within the areas below, you know, to also follow this example. Or the other way around, if this is just a very strong culture of fear at the top, you know, why should you wonder that you have the same kind of culture below? So that's my biggest learning. So I'm a big fan of making sure that at the top we also have the right diversity.
That's excellent. Excellent point of view, and definitely reminds us on concrete levels why we need the diversity and inclusion. So great link to that work as well. Per Arne, your reflections on the learnings.
Yeah, I really agree with you, Thomas. It starts at the top, and I've been in discussions with tough sales targets in Ingolstadt and in Wolfsburg over the years, and and that is of course creating a environment which might not be healthy for a sales and marketing company as we are. And then you, of course, need to have a strong local management that can handle this in a good way. So I really agree. It starts from the top, and in a big international company, the head office is of course extremely important. And I as I've been in the company for a long time, I can see a big change actually. It's a more human way of dealing with targets these days than 15, 20 years ago. So something has definitely changed in Volkswagen AG, but I think it's still a lot of things to improve. Let me come back to one thing. I think it's really important that you in your work, I think I mentioned this yesterday too, that you really build in compliance, integrity into your ordinary HR business over the year, and that's how we try to deal a lot with the Together for Integrity program in Sweden, is to integrate that of course, if you have a good HR program and a good HR department, that is of course really important. It is, but if you integrate compliance, integrity as much as possible into this program, because then you will have top management working with this in coming with the job descriptions in the yearly development talks or that you have with the people. If you include integrity, compliance at all those times you have these meetings, then it's on the agenda, and the top management is working with it. The middle management is maybe more important, also is bringing up these topics, discuss it with the teams to get an open and open atmosphere in teams. And that is, of course, extremely important.
Great learnings. And it's always easy, so to say, to reflect upon the past and think about, okay, what did we learn? But Guido, I would like to throw a challenge to you. You have looked into the history, and you gave a great overview of that in the beginning of this talk. So if you were appointed as the Volkswagen CEO 10 years ago, what would you have done?
It's easy to say afterwards what you would have done, but what I would always recommend in a company is something that Per-Arne and Thomas also refer to directly, indirectly. A company needs a culture where people speak up. And that is so easily said and so difficult to implement. In all these big scandals, all of them, at least one person internally spoke up against what was going wrong. And guess what happens to these people? They get harassed, threatened, kicked out, always. So how can we make sure that leaders do not feel threatened by feedback? It's not only important for ethics and compliance, it's important for anything, for innovation, for culture, for everything. We need to create a situation where people can speak up. But now what companies do today is they tell their people, please speak up. And that's probably not enough, because you need skills to speak up properly. You need skills as a leader to listen. That is not something you just know how to do. Just to give an example, I can present a critical point to my superior in a way that the superior feels insulted, by moralizing it, by making it a point about the superior, him or herself. Or I can present this as a general problem for which I maybe even have already an idea about how to solve it. That's a very different way of talking about it. And as a leader, I have to understand that I get angry. And it's natural that I get angry if someone says something critical. We all are like this. It's human. But then how do I get this under control? How do I get my emotions under control if something critical is said? And how do I react properly to speaking up? That is, for me, key to avoid these situations. If you have a climate where people speak up freely, without fear, as a natural knee-jerk reaction, you will not see big scandals because they will be stopped early on. That's one thing. The other thing, and that refers a bit to what Margaret Daly is saying in the chat, the role of HR is key. How do we select people? How do we promote people? How do we reward people? That all in the past has led to a situation where the most aggressive, the most toxic people who in the short run seem to be very successful, get the reward, get promoted, and become the CEOs. I mean, there are more psychopaths in the top positions in companies than in the average population. Now, there's research on that. And the reason is quite clear, because we have created organizational cultures in which these people get easier promoted than someone who has second thoughts, who deliberates with a team, who takes more time to decide. If I'm ruthless, if I break rules if necessary, if I go for it, regardless of the risks, I win. And that is not what we need in the future. Look at all these names we take as role models at Tesla, at Amazon, at Uber. These are people behaving like psychopaths. I'm not saying they are psychopaths, because it's role model that we might have learned. And we celebrate them. And we shouldn't. Because as long as we celebrate this kind of testosterone toxic behavior, we will get these kind of leaders. And that's why I think that the point Thomas makes is so important. We have to have more diversity in boards and in leadership positions.
Well, thank you. So you would appoint a very diverse leadership team and make sure you have an open speak-up culture. I think that is great advice. And just in a while, in a couple of minutes, we will have a short break of roughly 5 minutes, and then we'll jump into the breakout rooms. And as said, in the first breakout room, you will continue discussing, the warning signs in terms of your culture and really how to avoid that and so on. And then in the second breakout group, we are going to deal with, the investigations and navigating complexities around data privacy and really doing the right things when certain expectations perhaps collides. So we're going to break out there in just a while. You will be automatically transferred to your rooms. But before we have a short little break, I have a question for you, Per-Arne, because now there are a lot of chief ethics and compliance officers, head of global compliance on the line, and people also that will watch the recording afterwards. And we are working with implementing global ethics and compliance programs and rolling that out. What is your advice to us, when it comes to these smaller subsidiaries in perhaps lower risk regions and so on? What should we think about when we quite sort of rigorously push out global programs?
That's a very, very good question, and I've been thinking a lot about that. I don't know if I have a very, very good answer to that, but when we started the Together for Integrity program in Sweden, Volkswagen AG then had classified the world in risk level, and that came from the CPI index. So Sweden is a low risk country, and so a little bit less activities were added to us to implement into the company. Even though it was less, I think we have around 80 or 90 processes that we had to roll out in the company, which creates administration, and a lot of them is a lot of administration to keep up with, and we are a sales and marketing organization. I'm dealing with people that just don't like administration in my company. So maybe I would suggest that think about adding more levels to differentiate your companies in the world, not only the risk level. Maybe think about entrepreneurial level of the company. It's an entrepreneur-driven company. Then it's yes, it's likely to have a lot of risks in that, but also you're dealing with people that are allergic to administration. That could be one idea. And also try to, as a third alternative, I would like to think about to look at the degree of a value-driven company. To what extent have you rolled out company values in the company? How is the speak up culture in the company, etc., etc. I think if we have added just those two parameters to the risk classification, the CPI index, I think we could have been a little bit more precise in rolling out these big compliance programs over the world. I'm not saying it's easy to find how to measure how good the company is in values, etc. That's very, very difficult, but maybe that could be something to think about.
Yeah, thank you. And it comes to our risk assessments, really, that they are a bit more diverse, not only looking at the corruption perception index, but having other perspectives there to identify the correct risks. It is a challenge, but I think you are spot on because there can be smaller units in a low risk country that are high risk because of the culture that's there locally, you know, and you said the entrepreneurial spirit and so on. So yeah, I think that's critical to understand what kind of entity is this really. But thank you, so great discussion. We could have gone on in this setting, but we will break out to have more personal and informal discussions. So Nina, anything we should say before we have a few minutes break?
Let's definitely continue this discussion face to face with our experts, everyone who are joining the table number 1. And so we'll be back in 5 minutes in the room. Thank you very much for the panel discussion and sharing all the insights.